Good morning, everybody. As Father said, we are responsible for the architecture of the new extension to the cathedral. Right from the start, one of the priorities that we were told about was how important that this museum is a sacred place and it's an extension of the cathedral. So as a result of this, through all our architectural journey, I've been having many lively, interesting conversations and discussions with my clients, with Father Manuel in particular. We talk a lot about theology and morality, and I was particularly interested in participating in this conference because all throughout my working career, I've worked in conservation, and the idea of spirituality and conservation is very close to my heart. Very often I am faced with an audience of young students and young colleagues, mostly they're less than half my age, and I explain to them that I am lucky because sometimes, because of my age, I'm able to see the origin of things. When the Berlin Wall came down, I was 30 years old, so I lived 30 years in the modern period and 30 years in the postmodern period. In the modern time, we were living in a world which was fragmented, as Father said that in his introduction. Our life was divided into very particular categories. There were communists, there was capitalists, there was East, there was West, there was male, there was female. Everything was divided and broken up. And you never tried to break those boundaries. So if you went from East to West, you probably got shot. If you went from straight to gay, you got thrown into prison. Nobody thought that a man could become a woman and vice versa. So crossing these boundaries was not possible. One day at the office, we decided to have an exercise and to describe the person that we were when we were 25. So when I did that, I decided as a sort of historical exercise to understand what was happening in the world in 1984, a very important and, let's say, from a literary point of view, interesting year. So I picked out three important pieces of news that happened in January, February 1984. I was born in February, and I picked up these three. Derrida, whom as you know, is the most, let's say, important protagonist of deconstructivist philosophy, the idea that the in-between spaces has been ignored for so long and that we can find solutions and we can find, let's say, we can base a world on these in-between spaces, breaking the boundaries which traditionally held us, let's say, in check. In January of 1984, the first domestic computer was put on the market. And as you know, a computer has changed our own individual identities because it helps us transcend these boundaries, break the influence and the prejudices that our religion and our let's say, country and our geographical location impose on us. And last but not least, in February 1984, Gorbachev went to London and he spoke to Margaret Thatcher, and Margaret Thatcher was reported to have said, "I really like this man, I think I can do business with him." So these were, in 1984, let's say, the rumblings of a storm that was going to happen 5 years later, which is basically the crash of the coming down of the Berlin Wall. So I often do this exercise because I'm constantly using let's say, the training that I had as a young man to divide things into binary objects, to try and find a way to see whether I'm prejudiced in this way and whether there is a possibility of finding solutions, as Derrida would do, which are in between. So I was particularly interested in looking at the phenomenon of the spirit, because this is what we're here to talk about, and its connection with the body. A very interesting and beautiful text by a Renaissance philosopher, Marsilio Ficino, who was the court philosopher of the Medici, describes how the soul infuses the body, how the soul is actually the form of the body, and how they are one and the same thing. Panofsky taught us that perspective, which is one of the biggest inventions of the Renaissance, is actually not the picnic technique, but it's a form of illustrating the soul. So a lot of Renaissance paintings use perspective to show a viewpoint. That viewpoint is the individual, because as you know, the Renaissance put the individual at the center of the universe, but more than that, and we don't talk about it so much, it puts the soul at the center of the universe. So I'm quite fascinated, for example, by The Dead Christ by Mantegna. You can see that the viewpoint is low, so it's a kind of a very humble viewpoint. But you have a body there, which is not just a body, it's a body which is infused by the soul, which is a sentiment which is exasperated by the two grieving faces in the corner of the picture. But soon after that, in the 17th century, you'll find a lot of similar paintings of supine bodies, which are no more than just a body, for some reason which I haven't really quite understood. Right up to the 17th century, the teachings of the first century Greek anatomist Galen were holding sway all over Europe. And it was only in the 17th century that anatomy began to be taught in schools and dissections began to happen, which were trying to understand how the body works, but also where in the body is the soul located. These are the famous paintings by Rembrandt, but also at this time, in the 17th century, a very important anatomist called Vesali discovered or put the soul in the brain of the body, and he made some incredible drawings, which you must all know, these muscle men which have been decorticated. And he laid the basis for it eventually became what we call today Cartesian duality, and the Catholic Church talks a lot about Cartesian duality. Strangely enough, if I had to think about the way I consider the soul and the body, somehow in my head, because I'm a modernist, I see them as two separate things. Now, this has continued to hold sway up till recently. 20 years ago, an American novelist called Tom Wolfe, he wrote a story. He wrote an essay called Sorry Guys, But Your Soul Just Died. He was quite impressed, as I was at the time, with these techniques of imaging, where he says that with imaging contemporary techniques, you are able to locate inside the brain the various genes and the various cells which are going to determine the way we actually behave and we actually live. So in a way, he's saying that free will does not really exist, which is why the title of his essay, Your Soul Just Died. But life is much more complex than that. Technologies have evolved. Techniques of scanning are now used for various very beneficial reasons in the medical world. And there's no saying where this is really going to take us. Latest developments in AI are opening doors to worlds which we don't know about, and this is just in its infancy. So the idea of the soul and the idea of the body being separate is finally dying and is becoming once again the idea that all is one. So that begged the question, as I was trying to write this text for this conference, Spirituality and Conservation, said, could it be that I'm using a modernist way of thinking? Could it be that conservation and spirituality are not two separate things? Could it be that conservation is actually a spiritual act? And could it be that it is a symptom of actually man's yearning for infinity? Because more than anything else, conservation is a desire of man to participate in eternity and to create immortality, even though this is not possible. So I did a little bit of research, and I found a very beautiful quote, which is taken from Gaudium and Spes, so it's taken from the Vatican Council, and it says this: with his openness to truth and beauty, his sense of moral goodness, his freedom and the voice of his conscience, with his longings for the infinite and for happiness, man questions himself about God's existence. In all this, he discerns signs of his spiritual soul. The soul, the seed of eternity, we bear in ourselves, irreducible to merely material, can have its origin only in God. So I began to understand that, in fact, conserving and preserving is not as much as we like to think of it as an individual activity and discipline. It's actually a natural identity, a natural drive of mankind to participate in eternity, to project objects which are meaningful to us into the future. So I really believe that sometimes when we try to understand how we can retain the spirituality of an object, even by the very fact that we want to conserve it, that is already a spiritual activity. And I, as a kind of a postscript, I'd like to speak to you about a monument which is very close to my heart, which is in St. John's Cathedral. And it actually is, I think, a symbol of the spirituality of the church and the power of the church, not only from a religious point of view, but also from a political point of view. There's one guy I discovered recently who is actually buried in St. John's. His name is the Count of Beaujolais. Count of Beaujolais was the third son of the Duke of Orléans, who was the cousin of King Louis XVI. The Duke of Orléans was, let's say, enamored with the parliamentary system of the UK. He loved England. He had a flat in London, was a big friend of the Prince of Wales. And he wanted to introduce some kind of constitutional monarchy to France, which obviously had an absolute monarchy, and did something which I think he was never forgiven for, that when he was asked to join the assembly and they voted for the execution of the king, he voted in favor. To this very day, it's disputed, and many royalists find the Orléans branch of the family, they call them regicides anyway. But then, as life is full of strange twists and turns, or what goes around comes around, 9 months later he was guillotined himself. And his two younger sons were imprisoned in a fortress in Marseille. The Count of Beaujolais was about 12 years old. His elder brother, the Duke Montpensier, was 14. And their elder brother, the new Duke of Orléans, was exiled in America. Both young boys contracted tuberculosis, and just when they were about to die, they took them out, they put them on a leaking Swedish vessel, they crossed the Atlantic, they went to America where they met their elder brother. And the elder brother was a very ambitious and, let's say, wily person. He wanted to go back to Europe, also to meet his mother, who was exiled in Spain, and wrote to various courts, and then eventually was invited by the King of England, George III, to go to London. The three boys arrived in London in 1800. The elder brother continued to, let's say, strategize plans for his future. The second boy was very quiet and taciturn and was a very good artist, the Duke of Montpensier. And the third boy was quite pretty, jolly, funny. Immediately he was taken in by the high society circles in London. He had a good time. In a way, he kind of rediscovered himself. But both younger boys continued to suffer from tuberculosis, and their condition worsened. And eventually, it was decided that his health could only improve if he went to a warmer climate. So Louis Philippe, his elder brother, took him to Malta after having had various meetings with ministers in London. And they came down the Atlantic because it was the time of the Continental blockade, came to Malta. It was a terrible journey. 2 weeks later, the Count of Beaujolais passed away. And in the public library, you find two very interesting documents. One is the speech or the sermon, which was the eloge or the eulogy, which was read out by the chaplain of the Order of St. John. And the other one is a description by a guy called Giuseppe Bartolo, I think his name was, which describes the funeral. And I went to the public library to see these documents, and in both documents, there's a very detailed description of the funeral. But when I read this document, my heart missed a beat, because I realized that the Duke of Orléans, the elder brother of the Count of Beaujolais, was not there. So he left and didn't even stop to bury his brother. In fact, he had gone to Sicily, where he met the daughter of the King of Naples, who was exiled there. And he eventually married Maria Amélie and had actually many children with her. But what is really interesting is that the funeral was a very grand funeral, sponsored by the British government, organized by Alexander Ball. And you begin to understand, I kind of questioned, how come a prince who was French, who was not even connected to the Order of St. John, was given such a funeral, organized by the English, and buried in a church which was not connected to him in any way. In fact, they didn't actually bury him. Lord Byron was in Malta a year later. In the diary of his companion called Hobhouse, it says, we went to visit the church and we saw the coffin of the Count of Beaujolais. It was lying outside the ground and waiting for better times to come when it would be taken back to France. So the Count was not buried. He was embalmed, placed in 3 coffins, and placed in the church. So it's very clear from the very beginning that Louis Philippe, who eventually became the King of France, wanted to take him back. And I believe that the monument which exists for, let's say, 40 years, for 40 years after this incident, Louis Philippe, who was the King of France, continued to build the monuments and continued to paint paintings of this prince. And my theory is that he tried to atone for his impatience and his leaving the island because he had ambitions to meet the princess and to marry her. She eventually became obviously the queen. And he made several, so this is a letter I found which is from Alexander Ball to Lord Castlereagh, who was the Minister of the Colonies and Foreign Affairs, which says, His Highness has left Malta for the present with the view of avoiding at sea the intense heat of the summer. I find that so strange. Clearly, what remained behind is the memory of his brother, the carelessness with which he treated the end of his life, because in a way he must have felt that he contributed to his death. And for decades afterwards, there have been monuments, there have been projects for monuments for the Count of Beaujolais. This is 3 projects by Grenier, which came up for auction at Sotheby's, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, which were commissioned by the French consul. Here, this is another one. In 1818, he was finally buried, and a plaque was put up on the wall, which was designed by a French sculptor who was a Prix de Rome winner, which represents a melancholic figure and a funerary urn. And then these are some portraits which were made. This was a portrait which came up at auction again, which belonged to the collection of Giscard d'Estaing, and these are portraits which were made in the 30s when Louis Philippe was king and clearly was wanting to immortalize the soul and the memory of his younger brother. That's another one. And then eventually in 1848, he commissioned a monument which was to represent his younger brother. I consider this monument to be a kind of atonement for his actions 40 years earlier. He even commissioned 2 artists to come to the church to depict the inauguration of the monument. You can see the Cappella Ardente, which was covered in candles as part of the event. And eventually, I found in various newspapers the intention he had to take the body away. So whether that has happened or not, I am not sure. However, in many descriptions of this monument by Pradier, who was the top sculptor at the time, he was a favorite of King Louis Philippe. Okay, it's kind of praised in all the art critic books, and it's almost compared to the Ecstasy of Santa Teresa of Bernini. In fact, I put a picture together to show how Pradier, who studied in Rome, must have had enormous influence by the incredible statue by Bernini of the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. So eventually, recently I was in Naples, I saw an exhibition of Jimmy Durham, It was called Humanity is Not a Completed Project. I felt that this could be the seed of what I wanted to explain to you today. In the case of Louis-Philippe and the monument, he kind of had unfinished business because he had never buried his younger brother. And he continued to create monuments in the memory of his brother. And in a way, this is what we're doing when we are conserving. We constantly feel that humanity is an incomplete project. In other words, even if we would preserve a building, we know that once it enters into the stream of time, it's going to require more attention, more preservation, and more affection. So, in a way, this fact that we are perishable is what makes us also spiritual. And it takes me back to my first idea that, in fact, you cannot separate the body and the soul. And similarly, you have to understand that conservation is a natural human drive towards immortality. Thank you very much.
Доброго дня, шановні дорогі колеги. Я дуже щаслива бути разом з вами сьогодні тут, в тяжкі часи для України.
Hello everyone. Miss Nella is very happy to be here in such difficult times for our country.
Сьогодні дуже непроста ситуація у нас в Україні, іде загарбницька війна Росії проти України. І страждають не тільки люди, а страждає наша історія, культурна спадщина, пам'ятки, бібліотеки, рухомі предмети.
Nowadays, as we are having Russian invasion, not only people are suffering. The focus of our discussion today is our national heritage, which is also suffering. They are destroying our libraries, museums, and different objects which are very close to our soul.
Я хочу подякувати і організаторам, і всім, хто був причетний до нашого візиту сюди, за ті хвилини нашого спілкування. Вони нам дуже важливі зараз. Важливо розуміти, що ми разом, важливо, що ви поруч, і що ви є нам в допомогу.
We are very grateful to all those people who supported this visit to Malta in such difficult times. All these meetings, appointments, just smart talks, they give us the hope, and it's really, really crucial how we feel this support nowadays.
Я вам хотіла подарувати організаторам цю книгу «Свята Софія Київська», вона англійською мовою і нашою рідною українською, де є вся історія, правдива історія, а не ті наративи, які нам весь час Росія розповідала, і нам, і всій Європі.
Mrs. Nella presents with a book which is actually published in our native Ukrainian language and in English, and there is, just to give a short content, it tells the true story of Saint Sophia Cathedral being a spiritual heart of our nation. Without Russian narrative stories, without propaganda, so it tells the real true story.
Як уже зазначалось, я 23 роки свого життя віддала захисту найвизначнішої пам'ятки світової спадщини собору Святої Софії разом з його архітектурним ансамблем, який був внесений до списку ЮНЕСКО в 1990 році.
Mrs. Nella has devoted 23 years of her life being like a patron and the head of conservation project of Saint Sophia.
Я на цьому слайді показую нашу Україну, яка вона велика, яка вона красива, є вона частиною великого Європейського Союзу.
Here on this map you can vividly see that Ukraine is just a part of Europe. You can see the beauty of our country when you come there, so it's really big in size.
Ну, так виглядає дуже схематично наш Київ, а ми сьогодні поговоримо трошки про інший час, про давній Київ 11, 12, 13 століття.
That was the way how Kiev looks now on the map. But today she's going to speak about Kiev in ancient time. Exactly, we are going to make a stress on medieval period.
На Старокиївській горі народилося велике місто, як пише Тітмар Маздебурзький, з 400 соборами, золотими куполами, з великою кількістю кам'яних споруд, з величинними вулицями, який був огороджений валами, і в місто можна було пройти лише через ворота.
Kiev was born on marvelous hills. They say there were about 400 domes there, and you could enter the city, which is situated on the right bank of the Dnieper, through the Golden Gates.
Ми бачимо тут Софію, яка є на макеті. Софія була побудована давно, зараз ми поговоримо. А так виглядає сьогодні середмістя Києва із Київським Софіївським собором.
St. Sophia's Cathedral is situated just in the heart of Kiev, and now you see the modern look, how it is surrounded by just a block of flats, the square, but she says that it hasn't changed much since that time.
Територія, на якій розташований Софіївський собор разом з своїми архітектурними спорудами 5 гектарів. Так виглядав Софіївський собор, це його макет, реконструкція на початку свого будівництва.
So this is the way how it looked like at the beginning of building. This is the beginning of the 11th century, and it was like founded during the reign of Prince Volodymyr, and then Volodymyr the Great, and then his son Yaroslav the Wise continued his works.
Софія Київська споруджувалася кафедральний собор для того, щоб показати велич Київської Русі.
So Saint Sophia was built like a co-cathedral, just to show how powerful the Kiev Rus state was.
В 17 столітті за гетьмана Івана Мазепи Софіївський собор був перебудований, і такий вигляд він має сьогодні.
So the biggest reconstruction after just the beginning was done after 500 years. It was the time of Barocco, and it was rebuilt under the protection of Hetman Ivan Mazepa. And this is how the temple looks now.
Не дивлячись на те, що зовні собор змінив свої форми, всередині він залишився абсолютно автентичним.
In spite of the fact that interior has been changing, what is inside remains the same.
В ньому залишився один із найбільших ансамблів мистецьких, це 260 метрів квадратних, мозаїки 11 століття і 3000 метрів квадратних фрески 11 століття.
So we would like to stress on the fact that there are more than 3,000 meters of frescoes, square meters, and 260 meters of mosaic.
Найвідоміша мозаїка Святої Оранти, Марії Богородиці, яка є захисницею нашого міста, і для створення оцього мозаїчного пано потрібно було 2 мільйона кубиків смальти і природнього каменю.
This fresque mosaic image of the mother god Aranta. It is unique because it consists of 2 million cubes of smalt, and she is like our patron from heaven. I mean, the patron of Kiev.
Центральний купол прикрашає чудова композиція Пантократора, Ісуса Пантократора, теж мозаїчна.
Also, the mosaic image of Jesus Christ Pantocrator is at the zenith of central dome of St. Sophia Cathedral.
Мозаїка Євхаристія або причащання – це теж прикрашають центральний об'єм собору. Це теж фреска 11 сторіччя.
She's speaking of all frescoes which belong to the 11th century. And this one is commission of the Holy Apostles.
Перепрошую, це є мозаїка.
Mosaic? Sorry.
Мозаїка. Центральні стовпи прикрашає музична композиція благовіщення Архангела Гавриїла, Діва Марія.
Mosaic composition annunciation on the columns of the arch. It's just at the entrance.
Також стіни прикрашують янголи, святі, величезні композиції по всьому об'єму собору. Бачите приклад.
Around the whole volume of the cathedral there are saints and angels depicted on frescoes.
Визначною особливістю нашого собору є те, що в ньому дуже багато є світських розписів, світських фресок, де зображені світські люди, життя їхнє, музичні інструменти, полювання. Це унікальна річ взагалі в будівництві храмів.
What is really very special about the artworks inside of the cathedral is that there are a lot of scenes from regular people's life, which tells us the story, what they did every day, which musical instruments they used, whom they met, family life.
Ну і зображені готські ігри. Це готи, які були при Візантійському престолі.
And here are the secular scenes were also depicted in the theaters on the center. So just the games.
Особливою пошаною користувалась не тільки мозаїчна Марія Аранта, і Аранта фрескова, яка зображена на стінах і була багато прикрашена золотими виробами. От нім був золотий. До речі, 2 роки назад під час археологічних досліджень ми саме частину цього німба знайшли.
When we speak about the image of the God's Mother, it's not only the case with this famous Mother Gotovaranda fresco. There are also mosaic, I mean, but there are also a lot of frescoes. And not so long ago, they found out the image which was decorated with golden overlays, and you can see just the comparison on the left and on the right where the gold was.
Софіївську Богородицю Аранту називають непорушною стіною. Ця назва виникла завдяки 45-му псалму, який каже: «Бог серед нього, нехай не хитається, Бог допоможе йому, коли ранок настане».
In our culture, thanks to the 45th Psalm from the Bible, Mother of God Aranta is called unmovable wall.
І ще з давніх часів, з часів середньовіччя, існує таке придання, що доки буде Аранта, ця непорушна стіна, вона буде стоять, молитися, здійнявши вгору в руки, доти існуватиме наш Київ, який покриває вона своїм молитовним омофором. І кияни до сьогоднішнього дня, і вся Україна в це вірить і це молиться до цього.
There is a kind of belief, we even couldn't call it superstition because it's really a deep belief, that Aranta is like a patron of Kyiv. And until she is safe, I mean, the image in cathedral, Kyiv will stand. And there have been a lot of proofs through history, before the war and during the war, that she really protects us. We all believe in this deeply.
Жодного разу за більш ніж 1000 років Софія не була зруйнована.
Saint Sophia Cathedral is more than 1000 years old, and it has never been touched by our enemies.
Але бувають і інші речі, які б я хотіла розповісти. От нас 13 на 14 січня 2022 року, рівно за 40 днів до початку війни, під час великої негоди, великого вітра, падає хрест із одного з куполів. І це вже стало якимсь предвісником недобрих подій.
Just before the war, in January, 40 days exactly, there was a disaster. I mean, problems, just weather conditions. And one of the domes was just blown with the wind. And everyone understood that all this is not just a talking. It was like kind of a sign for us to get ready.
І вже через 40 днів почалися атаки, вже почалися на Київ падати ракети, заходити війська.
And in 40 days, unfortunately, you know what happened. So the war began.
І на сайті Національного заповідника Софія Київська така появляється фраза: «Мужній українські народи, єднаймося, доки стоїть Софія Ранта, доки стоїть наш Київ, Україна, на нашому боці правда і на нашому боці Господь».
This is a screen of just the website of the cathedral where we address to courageous Ukrainian people, call everyone to unite, and again this famous phrase, until Aranta stands, Ukraine stands.
Така подія сталася, і були стурбовані кияни і багато українців. І тому було прийнято рішення повернути хрест, хоча він рідний хрест. Ми не встигли виконати, у нас був інший хрест із іншого храму. І не дивлячись на те, що йшли обстріли, що літали літаки, що постійно гучні були сирени в Києві, ми встановили хрест, освятили і встановили хрест. Ось якраз момент. Правда, він архітектурно не такий був, як рідний, але стояв хрест.
To raise the spirit of people, to make everyone feel calm, the Christ was restored almost immediately. At that period of time, Mrs. Nella is speaking. Russian troops were 10 kilometers from Kyiv. They understood that it is better to do this, and it will just keep the atmosphere and protect us.
Пізніше ми виготовили хрест за кошти меценатів, і пізніше ми його знову освятили, і освятив його предстоятель Православної церкви України, митрополит Єпіфаній, і він був встановлений на своє місце.
This Christ, it wasn't done according to the rules. Then in November 22, they just like renewed the process. Everything was done according to Orthodox religion rules. The head of our church, Epiphany, he prayed for this, and it was put in place again.
І також, дивлячись, що йде війна, музей як музей не працює, але собор все одно працює. І перші богослужіння відбувалися буквально на першому тижні війни.
In spite of the war, we still have regular in-faith prayers for Ukraine. The museums are closed because it's just quite a big territory. But this case is going on.
Ми бачимо представників різних конфесій. Тут і мусульмани, тут і іудеї, тут і католики, тут і християни. Софія стала об'єднавчим місцем, де всі молилися за перемогу, за те, щоб Україна вистояла, щоб вистояла Софія.
This is what you see, what is depicted on pictures, on these shorts, is a really a unique precedent, because representatives of all religious confessions. Ukraine is a multicultural country. You know, we have a lot of Muslims from Crimea. We have Catholic Church, Greek Catholic Church. They are all praying together because Saint Sophia is a kind of symbol of unity for everyone.
3 березня 2022 року митрополит Єпіфаній молився теж, це предстоятель нової української православної церкви України.
On this picture, you see Metropolitan Epiphany. He is a primate of the Orthodox Church, Ukrainian one, which has nothing to do and totally separate and independent from the Moscow.
20 квітня були освячені копія меча Сагайдачного, переможця московських війн. 17 століття як символ непереможності українського народу у цій війні. І теж освячував митрополит Єпіфаній. Копія меча. Оригінал цього меча зберігається на Вавелі у Польщі.
On the picture on the left, in the down corner, there is a photo of a hetman's sword. Hetmans were the heads of Ukrainian Cossacks army since the 16th century. This copy is preserved in Poland, but also in April 2022 we had a remarkable event for one of the hetmans who won the battles over Moscow armies in the past. He was declared as a saint patron of Ukrainian Navy.
Петро Сагайдачний визначився тим, що він розбив Москву. І сьогодні оця акція надзвичайно символічна, те, що вона проходить в Софійському соборі.
So this event is considered to be very symbolic because Hetman Sagajdachny was the one who won in battles over Russians.
Від самого початку російсько-масштабного вторгнення Софія Київська стала символом спротиву агресії, надихаючи мільйонів українців на боротьбу. Розуміючи це, російські агресори планували завдати ударів по найбільш знаковим українським символам, яким була і буде Софія Київська.
Since the beginning of war, Saint Sophia became the symbol of unity and freedom. And there are proved facts that they had planned to destroy it.
І у мене така теж була інформація із Кабінету міністрів України, з Офісу президента.
Mrs. Nella had this info from the government that they should be ready for everything.
І буквально з перших днів ми почали думати, як нам захистити саму Софію від цієї агресії.
And of course, they started to think what to do to protect this unique monument.
Ми в перші ж дні зібрали колектив архітекторів, реставраторів, інженерів, конструкторів, сейсмологів, геофізиків для того, щоб виробити цю систему захисту Софійського собору. Це один із прикладів.
This is a sample, like they were working according to the schemes with the groups, not only scientists, but seismologists, geophysics, designers and restorers, how to keep everything safe.
Ми подивилися, як такі споруди під час агресивних дій ворога захищалися у всьому світі. Цієї інформації достатньо зараз є в інтернеті.
They were researching the experience of other countries during the wars, how they keep it safe.
Ми довго сперечалися. Були великі полеміки між спеціалістами, і ми однозначно прийшли до висновку, що від прямого, звичайного ракетного удару ніхто не захистить Софію, а від вибухової хвилі достатньо було обмежитися менш превентивними засобами, ніж це показано тут.
It was clear that no one could protect if it's just a rocket, but what they could really do at the beginning of all this is that take local measures against explosion waves.
Ну, от початок цього захисту у нас ми мішками заклали ті місця, які саме могли бути вражені, там, де найбільші тріщини є і де є найцінніші розписи в соборі.
So, on photos you see that they just took simple things like sandbags, movable exhibits were taken to the storage or sent to partners, and they are near the places just which are really like easy to destroy.
З собору самі цінні речі були, звичайно, евакуйовані, безпечні місця. Найцінніші речі.
Yeah, just the most precious things were moved to storages.
Ну, а тут варварський напад на центр Києва, що близько, буквально біля Софіївського собору, кілометр 200.
What you see now, it's a central area of Kyiv, less than 1 kilometer from Saint Sophia. This is the 10th of October. This is the start of massive attacks. So less than 1 kilometer.
Софія наша.
Yeah, you see on the back, it's a dome.
Також були удари трошечки далі, але теж вони відчувалися на Софії.
All in all, if the explosion is further, so Saint Sophia is really like vulnerable, and it can feel these waves.
Але не дивлячись на такі жорсткі події, які відбувалися, ми все одно постійно доглядаємо за нашим собором і за всіми пам'ятками на її території. Я особисто займаюся вже більше 20 років комплексною системою моніторингу за станом наших пам'яток.
In spite of all the difficulties, people are continuing to work. But what Mrs. Nella is doing personally, so for more than 20 years, she is responsible for this material part, engineering and preserving.
У нас розроблена комплексна автоматична система моніторингу. На жаль, ми її не змогли до війни повністю реалізувати, на що й побачили зараз наслідки. Частково вона в автоматичному режимі працює, а частково нам не вдалося із-за відсутності коштів її реалізувати.
Actually, while she's the head of conservation project, they have created a big monitoring system. But due to different facts, especially now, they couldn't have an opportunity to realize it fully. Of course, it's just lack of the amount of funds and war circumstances.
Особливо було б актуально автоматична система сейсмічного моніторингу. На жаль, він був відсутній у нас. Але, тим не менше, демографічні дослідження проводимо, мікрокліматичні, мікробіологічні дослідження – це постійний монітор, розкриття тріщин, просадки, осадки.
So, everything is in process now. So they take care for cracks, for mold, but what is crucial for today is, of course, this seismo ideas and geophysics.
Вчора розповідали про систему біодрайв, вона в нас дуже ефективно працювала під час війни, коли вимикали електроенергію, і ця система не потребує електроенергії. Вона дуже ефективно показала свою роботу.
She shows the effectiveness of the system, which the representative of our delegation showed you yesterday. So it is really effective because it doesn't need electricity, and it showed an excellent case during the last time.
Я вже закінчую. Велику роботу під час війни ми займалися, звичайно, з гуманітаркою. У нас дуже багато колег з Європи присилали нам безліч матеріалів, які нам потрібні були. Це і осушувачі, це і пакувальні матеріали, це і генератори.
No words to express just all thank yous to colleagues from Europe who sent a huge amount of humanitarian cargoes for drying, for keeping safe.
У нас тут був такий зроблений великий хаб, і ми забезпечили біля 540 музеїв в Україні, півночі, центральної частини і сходу цими всіми матеріалами.
Saint Sophia worked as a hub for more than 500 museums all around Ukraine. So just new function during the war.
Не дивлячись на війну, живе Софія, до неї приходять люди, дуже багато делегацій, ми приймаємо перших осіб інших держав. Дуже багато дитячих програм у нас проходить.
Life goes on, international delegations arrive, and Saint Sophia conservation projects also pays attention to bringing the new generation for education.
Ну і на закінчення, що тисячолітня Софія Київська бачила чимало війн, які випали на долю українського народу. І ми сподіваємося, що і надалі її очі бачитимуть лише мирне життя. Для нас Софія Київська є не просто пам'яткою, вона стала серцем нашої української нації, що б'ється в унісон із серцями мільйонів українців.
To conclude, Saint Sophia has become the spiritual heart of our nation. It has been for more than 1,000 years, and we hope that everything's gonna be all right. So thank you so much, and
Thank you so much.
glory.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to talk about those works of restoration that are going on now on the rotunda of the Cathedral of Saint-Bénin in Dijon, which is quite a very exceptional moment because we are talking about a monument that is somehow exceptional in the history of medieval architecture. As you can see in the reconstitution, a very original plan associating a rotunda with a basilican plan. Of course, references to the antiquity Christian architecture. It was the biggest pre-Romanic architecture in France at that time, more than 100 meters long. And the rotunda is very, was always interrogated as the meaning of this monument, very complicated, very raffinated. As you can see, 3 floors and light coming from the vaults, many chapels, both in the lower floors and the upper floor. So certainly a very raffinated liturgical functionment that somehow now escaped to the understanding. And those are the views that were drawn by Dom Planchet in the 18th century, just before the rotunda was destroyed during the Revolution. Not really for ideological reason, in fact, just because it was very old and considered to be useless. The references of the rotunda are obviously high, and we can talk a little bit about the Pantheon in Rome, not only because of the rotunda plan, but also because it was dedicated on the 13th of May to Sancta Maria ad Martyris, all the saints. And the effect of citation in Saint-Bénin is both on the plan, both on the way of the vault, how the vault is open with an oppian and make the light enter in the whole building. And also the dedication of the rotunda was also a 13th of May in 1018, so it's more than 1,000 years now, as Ecclesia Sancta Mariae and Martyre. And the Tresme was All Saint Day until the 9th century. It became to be the 1st November, All Saint Day, from the 9th century to now. And in fact, the 1st November was also Saint-Bénin fest. And Saint-Bénin is the patron of the cathedral. So there is a net of relations between the time, between the people those buildings are dedicated. This is the destruction of the rotunda. You can see in the background the new abbey, which was built new in the 14th century and which still remain as a cathedral now. And the rediscovering of the monument was, in fact, in the 19th century, when Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, as an inspector of the diocesan monuments, set the project to build a new sacristy at the back of the cathedral. And he asked Jean-Philippe Suisse, who was the local diocesan architect, to set a project that, as you can see, is a neo-Gothical project to be in harmony with the Gothical cathedral. And there was no point at that time to restore the rotunda. The rotunda was destroyed, and it was only the first floor under the destruction material, and everyone was thinking that nothing could be possible to do. And during the works, this is what they discovered. And the community both the bishop, but also the community of Dijon and both all Burgundy was very emotionated to rediscover the rotunda and the tomb of Saint Benin as being certainly a very symbolic moment of the history and the identity of the people after the revolution. So everyone said, we have to restore the rotunda. It was a very big technical deal because the sacristy had to be built over the rotunda with that kind of arches system, and the rotunda had to be restored as being in fact almost dismantled fully and built again because the masonry was absolutely ruined by the humidity, by more than half a century of being underground. So the restoration was very important, but very fidel, very scientific for the meaning of that time. And we can compare with the plan and with the archaeology, it's quite fidel. The problem is that as being an underground monument, the rotunda has a lot of problems. First of one is because of humidity. And you can see the materiality of the architecture is lost because the skin of the walls has gone, because they had to pull it off because of the humidity. And you can see the salts, you can see the water. And we have also problems with the comprehension of the space as having lost many links with the light orientation and the liturgical uses. We know that the church was used as pilgrimage church, and certainly there were many ways to get across the building, and from the west side going in the lower church, as you can see on the cross section, and go to the tomb of Saint Benin and have a rest. There were seats in the rotunda, so people, they will make a pilgrimage for a lot of days, and they will stay many days in the rotunda, waiting for a miracle, waiting for the saints to heal the wounds. So they will stay at that point. And there is also certainly a lot of not pilgrimage, but processional liturgy, both from the west to the east, and both from the lower to the upper chapels. There were more than 40 altars. So we know that a lot of things were linked to this very sophisticated liturgy, that the comprehension was almost lost before the restoration. So many searches are to be done. And the architecture has also lost some of its meaning because of the loss of the connection with the natural light. This is, in the upper part, the reconstitution of the way the natural light could enter in the lower floor, the floor that is conservated now. And you can see that the central point of light is fundamental, but also there is a kind of cross coming from the south to the north, coming from the two big towers, in which there were stairs with light. The tower was highly lighted, and the light could enter into the rotunda. So, of course, the orientation and the way to orient oneself into the building was easier. And now, this is just before the works, everything is lost because of the obstruction of many of the windows. So the restoration had to be based on a very important archaeological deal and researches. And this is how it was going on for 3 years of restoration, 3 years of works, when we had very regularly archaeological researchers, meetings with specialists and archaeologues and responsible of the conservation inside of the works. And as you can see, many discovered were done, and could be integrated into the project of restoration. We could say that at the end of the studies, before we started the works, we had quite an idea to how to restore the building, but we could say also that the researches during the works were fundamental to keep and confirm and make the project go further in the orientation and make the spiritual sense of the building come up now. Those are some images of those researches and analysis of the archaeology. Very complicated, as you can see. We have sometimes more than 10 successive states of masonry. And we could be searching the way to restore and to integrate the archaeologic all was remaining and try to make again the sense of it. So the works of restoration was going after the research of archaeology, and let's point some few stress that on some few important points. This is, for example, the remaining of one of the big towers with the spiral staircase. As you can see, the spiral staircase is going around something, an empty space, which was connected to the exterior with windows that make us allowed to think that the light was very generous into this monumental stair. The monumentality can also talk about the fact it was not a service stair, but certainly a liturgical use for processional movements from the lower stairs to the upper stairs. So this is very interesting, and this part was discovered during the works and could be integrated into the perimeter of the building restored. So we could open again the door between the masonry of the rotunda that were built new in the 19th century. As you can see, very slightly moved with respect to the original, but quite fidel anyway. And we could open this connection toward the stair. And the subject was to protect those stairs from the rain, from the water. So you can see in the cross-section the archaeological spaces are covered with ceiling of concrete. We can only have some stones to suggest the starting of the stair. And this is the ceiling on construction. And you can see we could have a kind of eye of light that make the light come again and restore the orientation of the light into the building with this cross that makes that when you enter, you know where is the north, where is the south, where is the east, where is the west, so where is the tomb of Saint Benin. And the restoration could also integrate new uses, especially a new staircase with elevator to make able disabled people to go to this place, which was not possible before. And this is how, of course, creation and restoration are going together. So the works are not finished; they are about to finish during after this summer. So soon opening. And I invite you to discover this building that certainly will be renewed by those buildings, by those works, and which we hope the connection between the architecture, the liturgical uses, and the spiritual meaning will be more close according to the first state of this building. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to this conference. It is the farthest place away from Dresden I ever lectured about the rebuilding of the Frauenkirche. Dresden is a more than 800 years old town in the county of Saxony, a former electorate to the German emperor, and the first county who supported Martin Luther within Germany. On February 13th, in 1945, Dresden was bombed by a British-American Air Force and nearly completely destroyed. In Dresden, history is mostly regarded from that date till today, and therefore it seems that recent history is more important than that of the centuries before. The heart of Dresden had ever been the Baroque Frauenkirche on the left. It is a Baroque view, built and designed between 726 and 1743 to order of the town of Dresden by its head carpenter. The right picture shows the leftovers in summer 1945. Please let me introduce you to the following parts of this lecture: reconstruction or alternatives, guiding principles, authenticity, reconciliation, reconstruction of the interior, and the summary. Since 1945, ideas were created to rebuild the Frauenkirche or save it as a ruin. A lottery was started to fundraise the project. But from 1949 on, with the new state, German Democratic Republic, and its ideology, churches were destroyed, left as a ruin, but not reconstructed. The ruin over the decades became a battlefield for those who politically use it as a symbol against war and imperialism, and those who religiously used it as a memorial against state-in-turn pressure towards dissidents. Over the decades, students of architecture had to make projects on the ruin at the university. With the political change within Germany in 1990, it became possible to rebuild the Frauenkirche, and the call from Dresden, a newspaper article, invited people from everywhere to support their ideas substantially or financially. Famous architects pleaded the ruin. The Lutheran Church denied reconstruction because of the small group of believers and little financial means. Many people voted to save the ruin as a steady reminder, and others were fond of interpreting the Baroque church in and outside with concrete. The idea of archaeological reconstruction came up and was finally decided. Ultimately, the fight for the best solution was an ideological struggle for those who believed in ruins as a symbol and those who wanted to enable nowadays generations to create new religious and social life at an historic place. The guiding principles. Two guiding principles were existing: archaeological reconstruction and the former bishop's motto of showing the healed wounds and history on the second view. Archaeological reconstruction means quite clearly to reconstruct the Frauenkirche in its original scale, materials, color system, and use. This meant to us to save as much of the old stones and metal pieces and replace them in the church. To find a scientific way to calculate the Frauenkirche as a building made of regional, natural, not DIN standard sandstone. To find as much as photos and drawings to design the historical architectural details, and to learn to think within the regional Baroque language to design the unknown parts. The bishop's motto of showing the healed wounds and history on the second view was more challenging, as it was precise in the way of multi-dimensional thinking, but not in the way of following it practically. Can you imagine these words exactly tell a restorer what to do? I'll come back to that while explaining the details of the interior. Authenticity is a fundamental guideline in every aspect of life. In our case, it meant to deal with the fundaments, the inclined building parts, staircase E, the choir, and parts of the lower church, and the bottom parts of the facade. Staircase E and the choir, the sandstone blocks, and the metal pieces of the mountain of rubble. It was consent between all partners not to take down the remaining parts and build them up with the new parts again. So they had to be integrated in every stone layer with their changing dimension of inclination. The way of treatment of the surface had to be copied from the old stones, our samples. Some bigger parts were integrated as a whole with all constructional demands and dangers. You see the choir, and you see a crack in the here. This is due to the inclination. So we enlarged this part, and later on you have to know that our sandstone is going to be dark over the next 8-9 decades. So we have the older stones and the new stones that had become later on also black. And so in between you can always figure out what is Baroque and what has been added later. So with that, our interpretation of authenticity becomes a multi-layered story. This is another example. This is a wall on the northern side with this inclination. And even you see here, in every stone layer you have these demands to come along with the inclination. Reconciliation. With the beginning process of reconstruction, it came up to many people, that many people from everywhere wanted to help us with ideas and financial support. One of the important offers from abroad was, right in the beginning, from the British Dresden Trust. They announced to restore the cross on the lantern. Reconciliation is necessary but not easy. If two are struggling for reconciliation, they do it differently, and adjustments have to be negotiated. You have to know that a big part of the Dresden population is for every reason against what they call British, and the British do still have their own opinion upon Germany. This wasn't at all a fertile soil to develop a common project. But we started it, and the process of understanding, planning, and producing a gilded lantern cross. Nowadays, it is a symbol of British-German co-working, planned in Dresden, manufactured in London, because the main British worker was a son of a bomber pilot who took part in the Dresden bombing. Reconciliation is not only that two parts come together, it is mostly reconciliation within oneself. So many people supported our project and helped themselves by helping us. We are deeply pleased by knowing so many personal stories which are interwoven with our project. On the left, a photo from the beginning 20th century, the interior, the altar organ prospect, and the right one shows the saved altar, the leftovers of the former Baroque altar. Many participants in our birds were of different ideas how to use the Frauenkirche mainly after the reconstruction. It is said that everybody wanted to rebuild another Frauenkirche, church, music hall, sample of conservatory construction, etc. With the explanations before, I like to describe to you how we, as a building site directorate and representing the foundation, wanted to use the Frauenkirche later on. One of the main ideas of the archaeological reconstruction was the later use of the building as a church. Therefore, it was necessary to restore the altar to that extent that it is able to tell the story itself. Conservancy office members wanted to restore it to that dimension that all parts were fixed together and in between parts should be left unrestored. Knowing that the eye as an organ is able to deceive you permanently by producing the illusion that all parts are restored, or they are not, we developed the following ideas over the years. Speaking architecturally, the altar with the organ is the liturgical and artistic climax of the Frauenkirche. And when on top of the altar the burnt organ has to be replaced by a new one with a fully gilded and painted surface, we have to support visually the base for it. But how can you compromise with those who want to show just a few ruined parts in the interior of the church? We knew that Baroque painters mostly gilded the top parts of a sculpture to create the picture of a fully gilded artistic form. Our answer was the question, how far do we have to go and restore a detail to be able to read the story of the altar, and in which parts of the altar can we go beyond and leave it unrestored or partially restored. Thus, it would give us the opportunity to show the history on the second view and the healed wounds on the first view. It helped us too to show what is called intergenerational contract. Not only the old stones in the outer facade, but also in the interior, history is shown to the sake of the elder generation who are able to reconcile with their lives, and the younger ones whom a given explanation will help to understand what they can't know. This is where a stadium face in between. Nearly most of the old parts were fixed together. The cantilevers were restored to make the architectural lines visible, and then so that we could decide what we can leave unrestored or what we have to restore. You see on the right-hand side here that the stones from the parts from the organ had razored all the leaves away, and on the left-hand side it is still there. So this is the final result, and I can show it here. Nearly this triangle, the artistic and liturgical climax is this part, and it is the less restored part of the altar. You all will know how much effort it had been to negotiate every detail like this. And by the way, it was my most challenging task during my reconstruction time. We have another, and other examples. This is the old part of the capital. This is the old red color, which was the last layer before the former gilding. So it was a situation left over, and even the faces here are unrestored. Only the front facade has been restored. And if you look at here, you realize that most of the parts aren't restored. But as a total, you don't realize it. So first and second view. You see the altar in particular. You have the mensa. It is fully left unrestored, and all additions are in front of it. Or you see here parts, these are the older parts, and they have less color systems just to differentiate the old and new. The leftovers of the stucco about here, and you see we just added some parts, some architectural important parts that you realize parts belong together, and in between the faces not existing, or here only partially. So it is always the same idea. Epitaphs. The Gothic cemetery that had to be discontinued for the building site of the Baroque Frauenkirche preserved many stones that were turned around and used as an interior stone. In the mountain of rubble they were found and later on mostly restored. The best few are shown in one of the 4 chapels of the lower church. At first demanded by Conservancy Office, the epitaphs should be shown as artifacts that were saved, but over the years it became more important to us that they are a window to the 16th century. While reading or looking at them, we open up to the past and the written or sculptured descriptions of their lives. Lantern cross. One of the ideas coming up with the nearly finished building site was the integration of the unrestorable original lantern cross. Leaning 3 rows of benches, it is a matter of base for visitors in a small church and therefore also an economic topic. Leaving the space for the lantern cross with its original iron construction and its defect copper coating from the 1860s, it is a sign of reminding every single visitor to think of the past and the demands deriving from that period of time before they leave the Frauenkirche. With the confessions towards a historic place in nowadays life, we were able to differentiate between old and new, and with the help of the stone and its color change over the decades, the idea of authenticity could be intensified. The transgenerational concept has become visibly part of the church in and outside, and the wounds are healed. But reconciliation means an everyday process in the use of the building too. In 1997, I am working as a final responsible architect on the project. I tend to declare that all what I presented you was finally and iteratively developed by the group of involved people, either as a result of steady work, including many fights, or as a result of a developed compromise. During the long period of rebuilding, we were guided towards a solution, and we got it at the time it was needed. I do know this is difficult to explain and to understand in a time of accepted standards and processes. Provided with this experience, I would like to ask you to make up your mind while visiting Frauenkirche by yourself, whether we came as close to the original as it was forced by the Conservancy Office, and whether we implemented readable and deeper thoughts for our visitors. Thank you very much for your interest, attention, and again for the invitation.